Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I have my classics TBR for 2020. Lucy Parry is a booktuber who does a lot of content on classics, and she's introduced this new thing called the classics community or hashtag classics community for 2020 to kind of bring a more cohesive kind of friendship around classics within the booktube community, whether that's between booktubers, people on Instagram, people on Twitter, readers just watching these videos, that kind of thing. And I thought I would give my TBR for the 2020 challenge. It's a year-long readathon. There's no pressure to do a set amount of books, you set that yourself. It's all very personalised and what you want to read and what you want your goal to be for 2020. I'll leave the original video down below so you can get more information about it from Lucy. Without further ado, let's get into it. I was going to do 12 books for one each month of the year, but some of the books I've picked are quite big, and let's face it, 12 classics a year is pushing it a little bit for me. I'm trying to keep this different to my uni books. I have got one uni book that's kind of snuck in there, but I'll explain that later why that's still in there. And I find reading classics quite heavy, and normally when I'm at uni I like to read something a bit lighter, like a fantasy or that kind of thing. So reading one of those each month, I don't think it will be too difficult, except for the massive one. And I'll have to really push myself to read 12 books or 12 classics in 12 months. But that's what the whole challenge is there for, so I'm going to push myself, and if I don't read it, that's fine. But if I read some of them books, they're probably more books than I would have read anyway. So yeah, the first book I have is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. So this book, I believe, is about two sisters, one that's sensible and one that is not, and it has the classic Austen romance thing throughout it. And yeah, this has been on my shelf for a very long time. I have quite a lot of Victorian novels because I went through a phase of buying these Penguin English paperbacks for a while, and I've read most of them, but I have 3 or 4 left that I haven't read, so they're on this TBR because I need to get through them, because it's a bit bad to have them on my shelf for 3 or 4 years now and still not have read them. So yeah, that's number 1. The second one is another Jane Austen, and that is Persuasion. As far as I know, this is, again, the kind of typical Austen romance, and it's quite a short book, so yeah, I have a bookmark in it, so I feel like I might have started it and got pretty far into it, but stopped for some reason. And I feel like that's a running theme throughout this TBR, because there's quite a few on here that I know that I have started and not finished. So that's my second goal for the year, is to start classics and finish classics. Thirdly, I have Middlemarch by George Eliot. Now this is a hefty one. It is 920 pages long, so that's a big boy. And yeah, I wanted to read this for such a long time, but the kind of size of it has put me off. But we're not going to let that bother us this year. I did a little bit of George Eliot, like a snippet of her work last year, and I actually thought it was quite interesting, and I read a bit about her for my essay, which I did on Charlotte Bronte, and yeah, that's kind of made me interested to actually read one of her books. I also saw a book in Waterstones the other day, which is a autobiography of George Eliot, but it's written as if it was a fiction book. So it's as if it was, you're following her life as if she was a character within a novel, which I think would be really interesting, and I kind of want to read that. I don't know if I would like to read that first or after this one, because I feel like knowing more about the author adds to a book as you read it, but I don't know. Let me know which one you think you would read first, because I feel like it's different for different people. But who knows? The fourth book I have on this TBR is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. I've read 2 books by Charlotte Bronte, and that is Villette and Jane Eyre, and I've read 1 book by Emily Bronte, and that's Wuthering Heights. So I need to get The Third Sister and see what it's like. This is another book I've started to read, and I even started tabbing it, so I was really going for this one. And one, I'm going to have to change the tabs because now my tab's different, and we can't have 2 different tabs in one book. I didn't get too far in this one, not as far as Persuasion, 40 pages in, so I feel like that won't make too much of a difference, and I won't start reading it and then remember it and then be put off because I remember some of it, but I don't want to read all of it, if that makes any sense at all. But yeah, I'm really excited to read this. I've got this in actually 2 editions. I have it in the Penguin Classics cloth-bound edition and the Vintage Classics edition, which is a paperback, and they tend to have really lovely end pages. This one's got some flowers, and I have some other more often in a minute that I'll show you their end pages. As far as I know, this is the tenant of Wilfer Hall, and it's about the tenant of Wilfer Hall. I think she is a widow who comes to the village and kind of throws a bit of a spanner in the works, and yeah, it's about the kind of the people kind of getting around her, and I think it's a romance. It looks like a gothic-y romance though from this cover, but who knows, we'll find out. It is quite big as well. This is in the cloth-bound edition. I'll do this one because it's kind of, oh, that's upside down. This is a kind of typical size of a book, I suppose. So yes, that's 495 pages, so 500 pages, which is quite a long for a classics, I find, because they are quite, not harder to get through, but they're not easy reading, I don't find, because you just have to focus a little bit more on the kind of text, if that makes sense. Number 6 is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen, once again. I'll show you the end pages for this one. So that one's got those there. I think the last one's my favourite. I don't actually know what this one's about. I just have it. These editions are gorgeous as well. I want to get all of the Austens in these editions just because I'm a bit of a book hoarder and I want them all to be matching. And I want them all in the stripy ones too, but, you know, I'm not that rich. I've had these for years as well. I've still not got the extra ones, but we'll find out. This is 500 pages too, but it's slightly smaller. They're smaller than the normal paperbacks. If I show you compared to the Penguin edition, they are much smaller, which I kind of like. They kind of feel nice to hold, which might be a weird thing to say about a book, but there you go. Yeah, so that's another Jane Austen. I think once I've done this TBR, I'll have read all Jane Austen's books, so that's exciting. That's kind of like a bucket list thing that I want to tick off. The 7th book on my TBR is Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, once again. I think this is the one. I like those. That's my favourite end pages I've ever seen. Again, this is tabbed, so we may have started this and got 80 pages in before we stopped. I don't know why I keep doing that. I have to stop doing that. Oh, I found the bookmark. 100 pages in. So that's almost halfway. Yeah, that's almost halfway. And I stopped. So I don't know what's wrong with me, but we're going to try and stop doing that. I think this is a kind of parody of a gothic novel. Kind of Jane Austen kind of making fun of all the kind of gothic novels that were getting really big in Victorian times. Like a lot of the Brontes did gothic kind of novels. But yeah, I think that's why I started reading this, because I thought that would be quite interesting, because I did gothic novels for my A-levels. Yeah, that's another quite short one, so that'll be nice to read when kind of uni gets a bit heavy. And yeah, the last 3 books I don't have them in physical form with me. They're back in my other flat, so I'll just pop a picture somewhere here if I can figure out how to do that in the editing. That wasn't number 7. I missed a book. This is how you should not be organised. So, number 7. This is the Poetic Edda, and it is translated by Caroline Larrington. It is about after Ragnarok. If you probably have seen the Marvel film, that is the Viking kind of folklore that the whole world is going to come to an end in this massive fight. And this is kind of after that. I don't know much about it because I haven't actually started. This is the one book that is for my module next year. So it's a little bit of a cheat because I have to read it anyway, apart from this TBR. But I actually genuinely want to read it, which is why I put it on here as part of it. I do want to read a lot more about kind of Thor from the kind of original text, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm quite excited to read this. It's not very long, and it's all written in speech. I don't know if you can see that. That wasn't a very good page just to show you. So it's like Thrum said, or Thor said. I need to read that. I don't know if I'll read that before the start of the year. I probably should have, but if not, it will be being read in the first week of January. So yes, excited for that. And as I said, the next 3 books are not here in physical form with me, so I'll post a picture up beside me somewhere, and they kind of delve away from the kind of Victorian novels that I've been going on about. The first one is the Odyssey by Homer, obviously. Specifically, I want to read the one that's translated by Emily, I want to say Wilson. Emily Wilson, I believe it is Emily Wilson. Specifically because she is the first female to translate the Odyssey, and she only did it in 2017, which is quite late if you think about it. It's kind of been very talked about within the kind of like literary community because it is so different to what has been translated in the past, especially specific scenes that kind of discuss sexual scenes, if that makes sense. They're not really overtly sexual, but kind of how the woman is portrayed in them is much different in Emily's version to, say, Fagel's version, which is the kind of more traditional. Most people probably have read that if they've read the Odyssey in English. So yeah, I'm interested to read that. I also want to read The Aeneid by Virgil because I started to read it last year for an essay and I got really into the section I did. I only did a snippet of it and I just want to finish it now because I want to see more of it, and it's kind of a bucket list thing. I feel like a lot of classics are a bucket list thing that I want to tick off, which is definitely what it is for my last book, which is Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. That is a chunky book. I have it in the vintage edition, but the actual vintage edition is, even though these ones are smaller than paperbacks, the other one is bigger than paperbacks and like thicker than Middlemarch. So it is big. It is hefty. And I feel like I'm going to be reading that across the majority of the year. So I'm going to try and like split it down to reading, say, like 50 pages a month or 70 pages a month, however many pages I have to read per month to finish it in the year, which is kind of why this TBR is not 12 books long, because I don't think I'd be able to read much more than that. But yeah, I've wanted to read that for so long. The vintage edition is beautiful, which is mainly why I bought it, but I actually genuinely want to read it because I haven't read any Russian classics and I feel like I need to because they are renowned. It is a pretty incredible story and I've seen the film. The film was good, but I feel like I just want to read the books. I prefer the books anyway. And yeah, I just wanted to read it. I was meant to read it last year. I took it to uni with me to read. Never happened. So now that I have this kind of community support, hopefully, maybe, I don't know, all these set goals that I have for specifically classics, hopefully I will get to it and finally tick it off. So yeah, that's my TBR for 2020, or my classics TBR for 2020. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know which classics you want to do. Even if you want to read one classics over the year, I think that's still a great achievement if you wouldn't normally read a classic, because especially for things like the Odyssey and the Aeneid, they are where literature began, and they create a foundation for so many things that you read that you wouldn't even know had subtle kind of intertextual references to them. They're just a great foundation to have, and they're generally quite interesting. Like, there's a reason that they've stuck around for so long, and why people still study them, why people are like spending their lives dedicated to finding out more things about them. So yeah, just challenge yourself to read one classic if you wouldn't, read two if you normally read one. Just, yeah, make 2020 a challenge year.